Ilan na yung subscriber? Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live streaming of basic transfer pricing. Thank you to our subscribers. Ilan na? 689. Okay, so as of March 10, 2021, our subscriber is 689, no? Thank you very much and shout out sa lahat ng mga subscribers natin. Thank you very much for the support. Maingay doon, Hari. Okay? So, let's continue with our discussion on the transfer pricing policies. Alam nyo, when we talk about transfer pricing policies, walang katapusan yan eh. Saka sobrang dami niyan, no? Kaya inuunti-unti lang natin sa inyo. And so the first part of our live streaming tonight, I will continue discussing to you the transfer pricing policies and the documentation requirements. And yung second part natin is the discussion of the tax case, no? So continue lang tayo doon sa pharma company versus the Eastern Court of Denmark. Tama ba, Hari? Okay, so walang shout out? Ilan yung viewers natin? Viewers po ay 7. Okay, so thank you very much for watching sa ating mga viewers. And let's continue with our transfer pricing policies discussion and documentation. Transfer pricing, no? Documentation, very important. As I told you, based dun sa mga cases po na discuss na natin, yung mga cases that already reaches the court, na decision na ng korte, very, very important yung documentation. Why? Kasi yun yung basis na pagkaroon ng decision yung court over your case. That's why one of the transfer pricing documentation is your transfer pricing analysis that should be prepared by a transfer pricing analyst. Akin na, Hari, pakita natin sa mga viewers natin, no? Takpan ko lang yung pangalan, pero I just completed ito. Alisin ko lang yung pangalan kasi ito po yung transfer pricing analysis report na natapos na natin, no? Ito ay isang manufacturing company. So this has to be picked up tomorrow, no? So nakatapos tayo ng isa. But just imagine that to. Ganyan po siya kakapal, no? If you want to have an exhaustive na transfer pricing documentation, ganyan po siya kakapal, no? Hindi ba pwede maglagay ka ng thumbnail diyan sa Oo, pag naglagay ka ng thumbnail yan na lang mo. I-thumbnail mo yung transfer pricing analysis report po. Ganyan po siya kapal, no? At saka ganito siya dami. Para ka din gumawa ng isang libro. Okay. Balik mo dyan. Okay. So let's continue with our transfer pricing policies and documentation discussion. Ano ba yung mga policies na dapat meron ang isang company, no? Sa dami ng nagtatanong sa akin at ma'am, nag-a-advise ka rin ba about transfer pricing policies? Of course, kasi ang transfer pricing policies lang naman, ang guide mo dyan is what? It should conform with the Armsland principle. Ano means conform with the transfer pricing principle? We mean that the policies or yung mga implemented programs or the way the company is managed, it should conform with the Armsland principle, which is when there is a decision making or policy making that should be made, it should be at par or similar with that of the independent parties. Hindi yung you transfer your asset without any consideration. That is not arm's length. Why? What is arm's length is when you transfer your asset to a related company, it should have a consideration so that once magagaling yung assets mo na yan sa isang company, may disposal of assets siya, hindi mo siya ilalagay doon na disposal of assets is free. No? Meron niyang determination of the proper value of the assets disposed and then lagyan mo siya ng consideration para binili din siya ng another party. That is for tax purposes. Although, sabi nyo na, sa akin din naman yung another corporation, ako din yung may-ari. No? But for tax purposes, the two corporations are different entities. At yung different entities na yan, ang daming ang lamukhari. Umpisa pa lang nangangagat na. No? And that two separate entities should have an arm's length transactions, meaning kung ano yung kanilang yun, marami talaga, no? Kung ano yung transactions ng halimbawa transfer ng assets, transfer of property and equipment, dapat may consideration, no? As if they are two separate entities. That is only for tax purposes. Even though in real transactions, wala naman talagang bayad. Wow. Sabi ko na yan. Okay. And so ano-ano po yung mga example of the transfer pricing policies na dapat meron ang isang company. So one of the example that I gave you is the transfer of asset, no? So transfer of asset from one related party to another related party should be with a consideration. Hindi pwedeng libre, no? That is transfer of asset. Another is use of asset, no? Kasi meron akong na-audit na company, no? PESA registered enterprise siya, manufacturing of textile dito sa Pilipinas. And then when I try to look at the balance sheet, wala siyang machineries and equipment. No? Wala siyang machineries and equipment. Pero manufacturing company siya. So, ang tanong ko, ano yung ginagamit mo para makapag-process ka ng product? Because wala kang machineries. Ano yun? Kinakamay lang ng mga tao? Kasi pananahin ng damit eh. No? So, ano yun? Kinakamay ng mga tao? Because wala kang machineries and equipment. Ma'am, we are using the machineries and equipment of our parent company, and it is used by us for free, no? Pinapagamit lang daw ng parent company nila sa kanila as free, no? So anong dapat? Hindi siya arm's length. And if it is not arm's length, then during the transfer pricing audit, magkaroon ng adjustment ang examiner. Anong gagawin niya? Maglalagay siya ngayon ng rental, no? Rental expense, no? Dapat. So rental expense yan sa isang party, rental income to another party, no? So those are also points that you have to consider when you make your transfer pricing policies. No? Another is the research and development. Sabi ko sa inyo, research and development is very crucial or very important in the development of new product or in the value-added features of existing product, no? Kasi kagaya ng cellphone, pagka ang cellphone mo, hindi ka nagre-research and development and then no added features every month, then maiiwanan yung iyong cellphone, no? Kaya anong ginagawa? Palaging nag-innovate, palaging research and development, no? But if you try to look at dito po, kasi pag gumawa po tayo ng transfer pricing policies natin, be sure na nasa inyo ito, no? Yung RAMO 1-2019. Bakit? Kasi ito yung transfer pricing audit guidelines. So, dapat may guide na tayo na yung ating mga transfer pricing policies pasado pagdating po ng audit, no? So, anong sinabi dito sa transfer pricing audit guidelines? Dapat yung ating research and development should not exceed 3%, no, of the sales. No? So, halimbawa, meron kang 1 million na sales. 3% of that ang gastos mo sa research and development. Why? Kasi there are cases wherein companies spend too much in research and development, but all you know, they are developing a new product. And of course, if you are developing a new product, then you cannot charge it as an expense. Why? Because you have to capitalize it and amortize it later on. So anong dapat? If you are developing a software, no? And then gumastos ka ng 1 million. Yung 1 million na yan, hindi mo pwedeng i-claim yan as operating expense, no? Para i-deduct mo sa company mo expense during the year. Anong gagawin mo dyan? Since nagde-develop ka ng bagong software, you capitalize that research and development expense, and then pag nabuo mo na yung product, na-develop mo na yung product, then you have to amortize it during the life of the product. Halimbawa, 5 years mo pa kinabangan yung na-develop mo na software, then you amortize or you depreciate, no? Kasi dito sa case natin sa Pharma AS, ang ginawa nila sa intangibles nila is depreciate, no? And then yung goodwill nila, kaya sila na-adjust dito ng Tax Authority of Denmark because dinepreciate nila ang goodwill for 16 years, and that is 57 million a year, no? Dinepreciate nila. Sa atin, ang goodwill is not considered for tax purposes, no? For valuation lang and for record purposes, disclose natin, linalagay natin sa financial statement. But for tax purposes, for the computation of taxes, disregard po ang goodwill, no? Okay. Siguro yung nagbenta for more, the consideration or value ng binenta niya, pwede siyang mag-recognize ng gain, no? Pero doon sa bumili, binili niya yung 1 million na property, binili niya, or business, binili niya ng 1 million worth, ang property, binili niya ng 2 million, then may goodwill na 1 million, no? Excuse me. Okay. So, we should be careful with our policy when it comes to research and development, no? So, our policy should conform with the existing regulations. And yun yung sabi ko sa inyo, our existing regulations for transfer pricing audit is RAMO 1-2019. So, be sure that when you make your transfer pricing policy, you consider these audit guidelines, no? So, ano pa? In the use of the selection of the transfer pricing method, you have to consider the 5 methods, no? Or the 6 methods kung meron pa kayo. And yan na yung susundin ng company, no? But it should be approved first by the management. Kasi halimbawa, karamihan na sa mga BPOs natin, they are using the cost plus method, no? But if you try to look at depending on the role or the functions of the BPO or the business process outsourcing, sometimes it is the function of the BPO here in the Philippines is very crucial to the operation. Halimbawa, nasa kanya yung research and development, no? The research and development is being outsourced. Halimbawa, software development. So, yung mga nag-develop talaga ng software nandito sa Pilipinas. No? And that is the main business of the company. So, ano dapat? Hindi dapat lang siya na cost-plus method. Para sa akin, doon sa mga na-audit ko na, it should be profit split method. No? Ganon din yung mga nagsusupply ng mga e-books, no? Sa atin. So, sila yung gumagawa ng e-books dito sa Pilipinas. So, since that is the function of the business, yan ang crucial na function. So, dapat hindi ka lang cost plus, no? Kasi main yan eh. So, ano dapat? Ang nire-recommend ko dyan is profit split. But of course, analyst ka lang eh. Transfer pricing analyst ka lang. Your decision, your recommendation will not be accepted by the management kung ayaw nila, no? Hindi mo rin sila pwedeng pilitin. That's why all you have to do is just to recommend, and it is for the management to approve. That's why the transfer pricing policies should be approved by the management, no? Kahit meron pa kayong consultant, and which is true here in the Philippines, no? Ang daming companies kumukuha ng consultant. pagdating sa actual na overturn pa rin sila ng management, hindi sila sinusunod. No? Experience ko na yan. Kasi, sasabihin sa akin, ay, ayaw ko niyan. Ma'am, ito na po yung statutory. Sir, ito na po yung statutory requirements. Ay, ayaw ko niyan. No? So, all you have to do is to tell your clients na ganun dapat. So, it's up to them to approve it or not. Why? Kasi in the end, sila pa rin yung ma-penalize, hindi naman ikaw. No? Basta ang importante lang, binayaran kanila for your services. So, yun na lang yung pakonsuelo ko sa sarili ko. Binayaran naman ako dito. So, in case na ma-penalize sila, sa kanila na yun. Kasi sinasabihan mo na hindi naman sila susunod. No? And then, yung ayaw ko sa lahat, meron akong BPO na tinorn down kasi gusto nila akong gawing consultant. Pero ayaw nila magbayad na tax. Sabi ko, consultant lang ako. Hindi naman ako may-ari ng BIR, no? Nasasabihin ko sa kanila, okay, huwag nyo itong bayaran. Kung nagko-consultant ako, para doon sa gusto magbayad ng tax na maayos yung compliance. Pero yung ayaw magbayad, atras ako doon. Why? Because pag hindi mo yan sinabihan o kaya pabayaan mo sila and then amenable ka na, huwag sila magbayad ng tax. Later on, ma-penalize sila, ikaw na consultant ang sisisihin. That's why consultants should also be very, very careful, no? Especially on tax matters, no? So, when you advise your client and then ayaw nila, then sa protocol natin, no, iwanan mo yung client na yan. Kasi later on, pagka-problema yan, sigurado, ikaw yung sisisihin, no? So, we're talking of policies, and policies are approved by the management, no? So, I have discussed to you the transfer of assets, the use of assets, yung intangibles, no? Yung development of intangibles, paano natin i-value at saka paano natin claim as an expense, no? Especially the research and development. So, sabi natin, the research and development should only be 3% ng total sales, no? Kasi, pagka sumobra pa dyan, dapat hindi na siya expense, no? Dapat i-capitalize na siya. Okay? And then, ano pa, actually, sabi ko sa inyo, ang transfer pricing policies, wala yang katapusan. Wala yang limit, wala yang boundary. Sobrang dami niyan, no? Okay. Ano pa yung mga dapat natin na i-consider when we make our transfer pricing policies? No? Ito pa yung sa capital natin, no? Sa the use of the working capital. Kasi sa that is also a potential transfer pricing issues because later on sobrang may question na yung working capital mo o kaya negative na, pero yung mga expenses mo, ang dami pa rin, no? So, just like yung isang na-audit ko, meron silang stock option for the officers, no? Ang dami, but they're losing for how many years? So, hindi siya dapat. Why? Because the company is already losing, tapos nangungutang na lang. Tapos, bigay pa sila ng bigay ng compensation doon sa mga key management personnel nila na ang lalaki, no? So, anong tawag doon? Walang commercial reason or walang business reasons or it is not commercially rationalized, no? Or rational. Walang commercial rationale yung paggawa ng ganyang klaseng transaction. That's why, pagdating ng transfer pricing audit can be adjusted, no? Sa transfer pricing kasi, ang findings, adjustment. You have to adjust the income. Kaya if you try to look at itong Pharma AS natin versus the Eastern High Court of Denmark, ang tawag dito sa assessment nila, adjusted. So the income should be adjusted, you know, for 5 years. 5 years itong case nila, no? Another issue or policies that we have to consider and also the documentation na gagawin natin, ito po yung development ng intangibles or the recognition of intangibles. Ito nga, since gumagawa kami ng transfer pricing analysis, I have to look for companies na i-benchmark natin dun sa company or our tested party na ginagawa natin ng report, no? So we have to, ang ginagawa ko, I have to choose the companies with the same industry classification with that of the company na ginagawa natin ng transfer pricing study, no? And after that, kukuha ka na ngayon, mag-gather ka ngayon ng mga information nila. Hari, try na din natin na mag-gather sa UP. Doon sa UP Library, may mga annual reports doon yung mga companies. So, kukuha na rin tayo doon, no? Same lang din naman may bayad yung ID and then yung reproduction. No? And then, once ito na, andyan na sa iyo yung mga companies, you have to analyze also the companies, the comparables, yung mga total assets niya, liabilities, para magkaroon ka ng adjustment if they are not similar, no? At ang napapansin ko, halos walang intangibles, no? They did not recognize intangibles in their balance sheet. Pero manufacturing company. So, paano mo masabi na ang manufacturing company walang intangibles? Bakit? Yung logo pa lang, yung business process pa lang na ginagamit niya, yung kanyang trademark na ginagamit, kinakabit dun sa product, those are all intangibles and that should be valued. Whether registered or not po yung mga intangibles natin, we have to recognize them and then we have to value them and report in our balance sheet. But sad to say, ikaw, Hari, may nakita ka na intangibles?
Meron mga 2-3 lang.
Anong klaseng intangibles?
Computer software.
Yun, karamihan, no? Especially if computerized accounting siya, so may software, may binili. No? So yun lang yung mga intangibles na nakalagay doon. Pero, if, ito sa mga gumagawa ng transfer pricing, sino yun? May kumakatok? Lakas 3 beses. Tapos umilaw yung Tanungin mo muna, wag mo muna buksan. Kumakatok po. Akala namin multo na naman. Okay. Nawala tuloy ako. Okay. So, yung intangibles po are very important, no? So, wag kayong pumayag na you are a manufacturing company and then you did not recognize the, what do you call this? Intangibles, no? Maku-question. Why? Kasi, ang manufacturing has so many intangibles. At pag hindi mo yan na-recognize, misrepresented yung inyong financial statements, no? Especially pag wala kayong values na nilagay dyan sa mga intangibles ninyo. So, you will be misrepresenting your financial statements. Lika. Ito po yung, at saka yung dala niya. Ito po yung mga nag-gather natin ng mga FS in our transfer pricing analysis. Kasi pinakita na namin yung 1 down na transfer pricing analysis, no?
Yung isa pa niya Isa pa.
Marami pa?
Yung pinaka-last pa.
So, hindi pa tapos?
2 pa lang yan Oo.
Pangalawang bulletin.
Okay. So, ito po yung mga nire-request namin sa is sobrang dami, no? Nakailan na kami. Nakailang companies na to. And we spend this so much. Pero ang kagandahan lang po dito, we pass it on to the client. Hindi sina-charge sa amin. No? So, ganyan po. Kahirap gumawa ng transfer pricing analysis. Kaya kapag nakagawa ka, nakatapos ka ng isa, sobrang happy. No? Because, yung parang sense of fulfillment, no, sa sarili mo. Okay. Ang transfer pricing po, mas mahirap pa gawin kaysa financial statement, no? That's why bukas din, i-remind ko sa inyo, we also have our 2-day seminar for tax preparer, no? Ito naman yung mga disclosures to the notes to the financial statements na minsan ang dami natin nakakalimutan, and also the financial statement for different industries just like manufacturing, sa construction, no? Emphasize natin dyan yung IFRS 15, yung mga contracts, and then yung income and expenses earned from the contract that should be disclosed also in the financial statement. And then we have the financial statement for cooperatives, no? Kasi merong ibang accounting framework ang cooperative. And we also have the financial statement for non-stock, non-profit corporations. So, iba-iba yun. That will be tackled in our two-day seminar bukas, March 11 and March 12. The title is two-day free seminar for tax preparer. No? So, yun po yung seminar natin bukas. And yung mga gustong umattend, you are invited din po. No? Okay. So, very important sa atin, yung sabi natin, yung intangibles that you have to disclose and you have to report in your financial statements. No? So, anong mangyayari pag hindi natin na-report yan? Misrepresented yung ating financial statement. And remember that financial statements are the representation of the management. No? Ang trabaho po dyan ng CPA is only to give opinion. Pero ano talaga at sino talaga ang may responsibility sa financial statements? The management. No? Kaya pag misrepresented ang inyong financial statement, it should always, na first na liable is the management. Secondarily, liable ang auditor. No? Okay. So, ano pa po yung mga consider natin sa in making our transfer pricing policies with the related parties, no? Kasi ang transfer pricing is all about related parties. So, all our dealings with related parties, dapat meron tayong certain policies followed, especially if the company is a multinational company with many different branches, no? Worldwide. So, dapat talaga yan may transfer pricing policies, no? Magmula doon sa recognition ng interest, sa mga interest charges between intercompany loans, no? Dapat meron kayong policies dyan. How much? At ano dapat para arm's length siya? The intercompany loans should bear interest similar with that of the central bank rate, no? Sa ibang bansa, LIBOR, o sa Japan, iba-iba yung central bank rate nila. So, dapat ganun po. And when it comes to interest, yung legal rate of interest din po, pwede rin po natin i-adapt yun so that acceptable yung ating policy. No? And then siguro we have to consider also the amount, no, na nilo-loan sa subsidiaries natin, especially if, halimbawa, sa ako when I analyze financial statement and when I analyze operations, kasi iba yung operations audit no? Halimbawa, the company is a small company, no? And then yung, halimbawa, merchandising siya, this is how I analyze, sarili ko lang to. I just share it with you. Ang tinitingnan ko, the company is just a small company and then the function is resale, no? Reseller siya or distributor siya. So at any one time, tinatali ko yung kanyang inventory that should be, meron siya on hand at saka yung nabebenta niya quarterly kasi makikita mo yan doon sa VAT returns, no? So, based on the disclosures sa intercompany loans nila, meron siyang standby credit with the parent company of $150 million. Meron siyang existing loan with the banks na 100 million. And then, ang ginawa pa niya, binenta pa niya yung kanyang accounts receivable. No? Ano din isalaw ko? Yung pagbenta niya ng accounts receivable. Why? Sabi ko, hindi na kailangan no? Parang wala nang yung tawag natin na business reasons or commercial rationale to do it. Why? May standby credit na siya na 150 million. Meron pa siyang utang sa bangko na 100 million. Yung working capital niya, if you try to look at, yung inventory niya is 90 million lang at one time, no? And then yung sales niya during the month is also 90 million. Yung turnover niya is more than 30 days. So, saan mo pa gagamitin yung ilo-loan mo? At bakit nagpapa-factor ka pa ng accounts receivable mo? Just to earn interest. But it has no business reason, hindi na dapat, no? Meron din ako din isalaw, mall siya, no? Sobrang laki na interest niya, expense. And when I try to look at, alam niyo naman yung mga malls, ang dami nilang paupahan, no, na mga stall. So, ang dami niyang collection a month, no? And then, ang dami niyang loan sa bangko. Ang laki ng interest. Sabi ko, hindi mo naman kailangan ang pera. Bakit utang ka ng utang? No? Yung honest naman din yung may-ari, when I asked them, anong sabi? Nagpapagawa po kami ng bagong mall. No? So, ano pala yung reasons? Expansion. So, it's not an operating expense. Pero anong ginawa? Chinarge lahat sa operating expense. No? So, anong sabi ko? You should capitalize your interest expense because based on your asset, wala ka sa balance sheet, may cash ka, meron kang rental income, no? Just very, very sufficient sa operation mo. Kasi siya na yung may-ari ng mall, wala nang renta, wala na may rental income pa siya. So, there's no reason na mangungutang ka pa. So, ano pala yung inutang? Expansion sa bagong mall. So, ano dapat? Your company, no, in making a business policy, you have to take note all of that, no? Kasi dati, kung ano yung advice ng consultant, o sige, ganito yung gagawin natin para makatipid tayo sa tax, we will claim interest expense. So, lagyan natin ng mga loans. Economic taxation na po tayo ngayon, no? Just right now, sinabihan nga ako ni Harry, na ma'am, may notice na dito yung AdSense sa ating YouTube channel. Sabi ko, okay na yan. Tinawagan na ako nung classmate ko na sa Congress. Bakit? Because i-withhold na nila, which is good, no? Kasi pagka ang pera kasi, hindi mo, tinanggap mo na, hindi na bawas doon yung tax, akala mo sa iyo yan lahat. Parang hirap na yung isang taxpayer para ibalik pa sa gobyerno yung dapat na sa kanya, no? At anong trend ngayon? Taxation without physical presence, no? Ano yung taxation without physical presence? Wala ka naman doon sa Amerika. Pero bakit i-withhold ka ng Google? Kasi yung Google nagbabayad sa iyo. Di ba? Nandun yung pera sa kanila. Pag hindi yun nag-withhold ang Google, wala na, no? Ang daming hindi magbabayad. Yung iba, sa sobrang laki na siguro ng utang nila sa gobyerno, magpapakulong na lang, no? Kaysa magbayad sila. Diba, milyon-milyon na. At saka manghihinayang na magbayad. Kasi the moment na ma-receive mo yung pera, akala mo sa iyo lahat yun. No? Limot mo na yung gobyerno, may share pala dyan sa income na yan. Okay? So, anong dapat natin gawin? It should form part as your policy. No? And sa paggawa po ng policy, it's the management ang gagawa niya. No? So, yung transfer pricing policies natin, take note, the transfer pricing is economic taxation. And when we say economic taxation, it will audit pati yung economic activity mo. And remember na meron tayong tinatawag na substance over form. No? Kahit ano pang classification mo ng transactions, the form will prevail. No? So, halimbawa, yung sabi ko nga sa inyo, utang kayo ng utang. Hindi naman kailangan dahil nga merchandising ka at yung kailangan mo ng working capital is such that 90 million lang. So, bakit may 100 million ka na standby credit, 150 million na standby credit, meron ka pang 100 million na utang sa bangko, and then, nagpa-factor ka pa, nagbebenta ka pa ng accounts receivable mo. No? Hindi kailangan. So, it should form part of your management policy. Sinong masisisi dyan? Siyempre, the management. Why? Kasi sila yung magde-decide. No? Okay. So, ano pa? We have discussed to you the interest, no? Interest sa mga loans, yung mga transfer ng assets, depreciation. So, lahat ng transactions natin na ginagawa natin, we have to consider transfer pricing. Why? Because if you try to look at the OECD, which is the Center for Tax Administration of the world, nandyan talaga ang priority nila ang transfer pricing, no? At saka yung take note also of the new guidelines dun sa profit split method, no? Kasi karamihan talaga, kung ako ang mag-audit at ako ang mag-a-analyze, karamihan talaga na companies that are using cost plus method, they are not supposed to be cost plus, ano sila dapat profit split, no? Sa audit naman, sa actual audit lalabas naman yan, no? And then ano pa, when we try to look at intangibles, no, balikan natin yung intangibles, how do we value intangibles, and saka saan natin i-classify yung intangibles. Yung ibang tinitingnan ko dun sa mga FS na nag-gather namin, saan nila nilalagay? Sa non-current assets, no? Pwede rin naman kasi non-current naman yung ano. At ano ba yung dapat na treatment natin with the intangibles? Do we depreciate it or we amortize? Dito sa atin, no, sa accounting standards natin, we have to amortize. Sa iba kasi, kagaya dito sa case na sinasabi ko sa inyo ngayon, ang ginagawa nila, depreciate. At saka 16 years. So, meaning yung goodwill na yan, pakinabangan nila for 16 years. No? Okay. Sa transfer pricing policy and documentation again, anong magiging transfer pricing policies natin sa sales, no? Sales plus markup. Paano tayo nang ma-markup? That is also a management prerogative, no? Management decision din yan. Kasi sino ba ang magko-costing? Sino ba yung magde-determine ng selling price of your product if you are a manufacturing company? Of course, it's also the management, no? So, in determining the markup on sales, pagka tayo ay magbenta ng product, ano yun? Policy pa rin yan, no? Management policy pa rin yan. Kaya nga sa transfer pricing, pasok pa rin yan sa policy determination natin. No? How do we mark up on our sales? Is it 40%? Is it 50%? Or nagma-mark up tayo ng malaki pagka high jurisdiction or pagka low tax jurisdiction, tapos maliit lang yung markup natin pag high tax jurisdiction para nakokontrol natin yung net income. Why? Because transfer pricing, in some cases, ang transfer pricing scheme nila is artificial price management. Kokontrolin nila yung sales, kokontrolin nila yung markup. Doon sa high tax jurisdiction, maliit lang yung markup para maliit yung income, maliit ang tax. Pero sa low tax jurisdiction, taasan nila yung markup, no? Liitan nila yung markup para doon lalabas yung malaking sales, maliit pa rin yung babayaran nilang tax. Kasi low tax jurisdiction, maliit lang yung rate, no? So doon sa nag-question sa atin na saan tayo makakakuha ng tax savings sa transfer pricing through artificial price management, no? Kung low tax jurisdiction, taasan mo yung gross profit and net profit mo. Pag high tax jurisdiction, liitan mo yung net profit mo at saka gross profit mo para maliit yung tax na babayaran. No, that is artificial price management, and that is transfer pricing policy po. No, kasama yan sa transfer pricing policies that you are going to make. No? And then ano pa? Pagdating naman sa net income, sometimes hindi mo rin ma-determine yung net income because you have the operating expenses and sometimes the operating expenses are variable, no? Pero halimbawa you are a manufacturing company and then meron ka mga distributor who are also related parties. So who will determine kung ano yung treatment mo dun sa distributor mo? Are they full-fledged distributor or they are just commissioner? No? So that will form part also of your transfer pricing policies. Kaya may isang company ako na nakausap na nagpapagawa din ng transfer pricing analysis. Ano sabi niya? We are changing our transfer pricing policy this year, no? So, anong makikita mo? Siguro tataas na yung gross profit niya. Kasi yung pagtaas, pagbaba ng gross profit po, ano din yan? That is transfer pricing policies din po yan or policy din yan ng management, no? Kaya yung mga nakikita ko, if you are trying to control your gross profit or your net income, see to it na you are guided by the benchmark, no? Kasi ito, Ito, papakita ko sa inyo. Ito lang yung first time lang yata na gumawa ang BIR ng benchmark eh. No? And this is for the year for the year 2012, no? Okay. So, anong mga industries, no? Merong advertising, arts, dramatics, music, bakery products, BPO, call centers, no? Mga garments, trucking. So, ito lang, itong year lang na yan na 2012, hindi na naulit, hindi na nagawa hanggang ngayon. So, tiningnan ko yung manufacturing company na ginawa ko ng transfer pricing analysis. So, saan siya? Manufacturing siya ng, halimbawa, plastic na lang, no? Manufacturing ng plastic. How much is the gross profit rate? 25%, no? Sa income tax, yung benchmark niya is 1.9, sa VAT is 3.27. So, gross profit rate, pagka gumawa kayo ng policy nyo sa office, how much is your gross profit rate? Kasi kung control ninyo yan, so dapat hindi siya lalayo dito sa acceptable na benchmark rate, no? Pasabihin nyo na masyadong mataas. Ito yung lumabas dun sa study no? Although hindi na sila nagawa ulit ng current study, pero more or less, hindi naman din lalayo dito. Yun, at least you have the guide, no? Transfer pricing analysis, ito na. Nandyan yung benchmark. Okay. May shout out?
Wala pa po, ma'am.
Okay. So, another na policy na gagawin natin. So, papasok tayo dun sa balance sheet accounts and also in the income statement accounts. Kaya nga, during my lecture no, sa PIGPA, I asked them, what is transfer pricing? Alam mo, magaling sumagot yung isang participant. Ang transfer pricing, sabi niya, is the pricing of goods and services between related parties at saka yung mga magkakaroon ng issue sa transfer pricing na depende kung ano yung method or process na gagawin ng company para makontrol yung transfer price, no? Sabi niya, pwedeng lumabas siya sa balance sheet accounts, pwede doon sa income statement account, or saan man siya na pwede, no? Which is true. Kasi, halimbawa na lang, you are related party manufacturer, tapos nagsusupply ka doon sa mga other related parties. So, yung pricing of goods na pinapasa mo doon sa related parties mo, form part also of your transfer pricing policy, no? Kung magkano yung markup na binibigay mo sa kanila at ano dapat, kung magkano yung markup ng independent party, same din yung pagma-markup mo doon sa related party mo para hindi ka ma-adjust, no? Okay. Ilan na yung viewers natin, Hari?
8 viewers.
Okay. So, sa paggawa ng benchmark natin, no? Kasi during the transfer pricing study or tayo mismo, the company mismo should have in creating your transfer pricing policies or in drafting your transfer pricing policies, ano dapat, you should have a knowledge about the industry where you play, no? Ano ba yung industry mo? Manufacturing ka. So, dapat alam mo kung ano yung nangyayari dyan sa industry mo para hindi ka lalayo sa iba sa kanila, no? So, dito sa Revenue Regulations 1-2019, meron tayo dito na rejection criteria for comparables. Meaning, ito yung mga dapat natin iwasan when we make our comparability, no? Or when we compare. Ano sabi dito? Reject companies that are no longer active or are dormant since they do not have economic activity. So ano yung iwasan natin? Yung mga dormant na companies or walang activities, no? Reject companies that are not listed at a stock corporation, no? Kung stock corporation ka, of course, hindi ka comparable doon sa non-stock na corporation. Okay. Tsaka yung mga walang financial information at saka yung companies which are owned by another by more than 25%, no? Ito yung mga subsidiaries or wholly owned corporation, no? Yun ang dami kong nakita, wholly owned corporations pare-pareho. So reject ka agad yan as your comparables. Reject companies that are not comparable due to volatility or iba yung profitability nila, no? Very yung magalaw, no? Yung gain or loss masyado magalaw, no? Reject companies that declared affidavit of non-operation and continued commercial operation, no? Okay. Discontinued commercial operation. Okay? Reject companies whose revenue level exceed 10 times higher or lower than the tested revenue level. So, sobrang laki. And then reject companies whose ratio of research and development exceed to expenses to sales exceed 3%, no? I discussed that already sa inyo yung research and development. Reject companies whose ratio of intangible assets to total assets exceed 3%. No? Kasi marami siyang intangibles. Okay. So, yun po yung ating transfer pricing policies. Although, hindi naman natin tumatapos ngayon, no, yung ating transfer pricing policies and documentation na lecture. At saka itong case natin kay Pharma AS, no? So, magkaroon pa tayo ng part 3, discussion on your transfer pricing policies. Actually, ang dami pa nating hindi na settle. Why? Because ang tatakil natin sa inyo, the transfer pricing issues, and that transfer pricing issues, yun yung potential source ng adjustment na i-cure natin when you make your transfer pricing policy. Di ba? Okay, so before I proceed with the case, break po, sandali. And that transfer pricing issues, Okay. Okay, so let's continue with our discussion on the case, no? Our case is about the Pharma AS versus the Eastern High Court ng Denmark, no? Ano po yung case na yan? It's about the adjustment, no, ng income 2006 to 2010, no? So in-adjust siya because may mga findings, may mga disallow, at saka isa doon sa mga na-disallow na expense is that of the amortization of goodwill, no? Na yun yung sinasabi ko sa inyo na 57 million a year. Okay. And bakit ko napili itong case na to? Because it made mention on what they have to do with the transfer pricing analysis report and transfer pricing documentation presented by the company. No? That's why sabi ko nga sa inyo, in making a transfer pricing analysis report, yung analyst should prepare herself na tatawagin siya ng korte if there are transfer pricing issues that will crop up during the transfer pricing audit at hindi magkasundo ang examiner at saka ang client, ang taxpayer, no? So for clarification of the issues, sigurado yung transfer pricing analyst nag-prepare ng transfer pricing analysis, susumo niya ng korte to give explanation or light to the issues, no? Okay. So in this case, saan na tayo? Dito na tayo sa key ratio analysis and basis for comparison, no? So the company has chosen the transaction determined net profit method or the TNM method, no? Ang daming lamukhari. Pati na sa mukha. Okay. So whether the company's result is at arm's length, no? So the TNM method is described in the legal guide. Ito yung transfer pricing law ng Denmark, no? So the TNM method is described in the legal guide, section CD 11.2.2.2.6. For this, there is also reference to points 2.58 to 2.107 in the OECD transfer pricing guidelines, no? So ano yan, yung transfer pricing method, yun yung chapter 2 ng OECD transfer pricing guidelines. 2010 edition. So 2010 pa kasi yung 2017 huli na lang yun eh. Yung itong case na to 2006 to 2010, no? Kaya ang ginamit din niya na legal guide sa OECD is 2010, no? Okay. So the OECD guidelines must be read in context, but these sections also deal with other methods. Ang method kung sa atin naman, no, during the transfer pricing audit natin, may number 6 pa siya na method, no, other methods. Once the company has chosen to use the TNM method, it therefore takes a lot for there to be a need to correct for a cost that relates to the operation. Okay. If this were not the case, in most cases, a company would be able to adjust the taxable result by an arm's length result. This would not achieve the purpose contained in Section 2 of the Tax Assessment Act. Yan yung tax law ng Denmark. Namely, to ensure that the intra-group transaction take place at an arm's length level, no? So the OECD guidelines 2010 points 2.62 to 2.63 state among other things. Ano sabi ng guidelines, no? Kaya tingnan nyo ha, kung mapapansin ninyo dito sa YouTube channel natin, tinapos ko talaga yung transfer pricing guidelines. Magmula sa Chapter 1, the Armsland Principle, Chapter 2, Transfer Pricing Methods, Chapter 3, Transfer Pricing Comparability Analysis, Chapter 4, yung Administration, no? Dispute Resolution, yung Chapter 5, Documentation, hanggang sa intangibles, business restructuring, tinapos talaga natin lahat yan. Because when we try to read the cases decided by the courts, worldwide, they also refer to OECD. Kahit na yung transfer pricing manual ng United Nations also refer to the OECD. No? Okay. Okay. So, anong sabi sa 2.62 na Chapter 2 ng OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines? Sabi niya, one strength of the transactional net margin method is that the net profit indicators, pwede siyang return on assets, operating income to sales, and possible other measures of the net profit are less affected by the transactional differences. That is the case with price as used in the CAP method. No? Net profit indicators also may be more tolerant to some functional differences between the controlled and uncontrolled transactions than gross profit margins. Okay. Kasi pag gross profit margin, anong method ang gagamitin dyan? Resale price and the cost plus method. No? Differences in the functions performed between enterprises are often reflected in variations in operating expenses. Consequently, this may lead to a wide range of gross profit margins, but still broadly similar levels of net operating profit indicators. In addition, in some countries, the lack of clarity in the public data with respect to the classification of expenses in the gross operating profits may make it difficult to evaluate the comparability of gross margins, while the use of net profit indicators may avoid the problem. Okay. So, yun yung advantage po ng net margin method, no? As opposed to the gross margin. Kasi ano yung mga gumagamit ng gross margin method natin? The gross margin as a method of transfer pricing. Ang gumagamit ng gross profit is the cost plus method and the resale price. Itong transactional net margin, anong ginagamit niya dito? The net profit. Also the profit split. But ngayon, may mga bagong regulations na yung profit split. In some cases, ina-allow din na ang split na profit is the gross profit. So that if the gross profit is the ones being divided or split for the companies, then each company may claim its own operating expenses to arrive at their net income. Okay. Ano pang sinasabi ng OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines? Another practical strength of the transactional net margin method is that, as with any one-sided method, it is necessary to examine a financial indicator for only one of the associated enterprises, the tested party. Similarly, it is often not necessary to state the books and records of all participants in the business activity on a common basis or to allocate cost for all participants, as is the case with the transactional profit split method. No? Kasi sa profit split method, all participants should be considered. Why? Kasi mag-split ka, all the profits will be aggregated and then split among the group. So, it will be, depend on the number of participants. No? This can be particularly advantageous when one of the parties to the transaction is complex and has many interrelated activities, or when it is difficult to obtain reliable information about one of the parties. However, a comparability including functional analysis must always be performed in order to appropriately characterize the transaction between the parties and choose the most appropriate transfer pricing method. And this analysis generally necessitates that some information on the 5 comparability factors in relation to the control transaction be collected on both the tested and the non-tested parties. Okay. So, yun po yung sabi ng OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines on the transfer pricing method. Now, let's go to the amortization of goodwill. Kasi ang sabi ko sa inyo dito, one of the expenses disallowed during the audit or by the tax authority is the amortization of goodwill, which is 16 years, no? 10 ang dami pang lamukhari. 10 which the company uses in their transfer pricing documentation is based on a company's net profit, no? This means that the starting point for the method is profit after depreciation and amortization of goodwill. Section 2.8 of the OECD Transfer Pricing Guidelines states that it is completely exceptional cost, no? Exceptional and extraordinary, that do not have a recurring nature or non-recurring, which must generally be excluded from the net result in the TNMM analysis. It is added, however, that is not always the case. Siyempre, kaya nga ang transfer pricing case, walang precedent, no? You have to study the specific facts and circumstances of the case. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-apply ng iba. Kailangan yung sarili niya talagang kung ano nangyari sa kaso, no? In Scott's view, which is the tax authority in Denmark, amortization of goodwill is in no way, itong Scott, ito yung tax authority of Denmark, but this was abolished in 2018, no? So, yung tax authorities nila ngayon is participative na between several government agencies, no? So, in Scott's view, amortization of goodwill is in no way an extraordinary cost, but of an expected recurring cost that is related to the current amortization and utilization of the goodwill value. No? So, this is emphasized by the fact that the amortization is continuously included in the company's income statement as an expense in relation to the operating profit. No? So, yung amortization, nandyan pa rin sa company's income statement. No? Kasi bakit 16 years yun eh, ina-amortize. Or ang tawag nila, dinidepreciate, no? Yung goodwill. In 2005, the A Group acquired G7 and thus G3AS was acquired by A's parent company, B, at market value. In 2003, G2AS had changed its accounting policies. Na yan. So, sa policies and documentation natin, papasok din yung accounting policies natin, no? Kagaya na, halimbawa, how do we determine the gross profit? So, accounting policies natin yan. So, how do we value the inventory? So, had changed its accounting policies which entailed an accounting capitalization of group goodwill. Oh, so, kailan to nangyari? 2003, no? Kinapitalize na nila yung group goodwill of Denmark krone 913 million. Imagine, sobrang laki, no? Corresponding to the difference between the cost price of the company's acquisition in 1998 of the shares in G5AS and the intrinsic value of the company as at 31 December 2001 with an estimated useful life of 16 years. So, yung goodwill, in-amortize nila ng 16 years. Anong nangyari dito? Siyempre, subjective yung valuation in favor of the taxpayer. That's why the tax authority came up with a disallowance or adjustment. Okay. Thereby triggering accounting amortization of goodwill, one of approximately 57 million Denmark krone per year. No? Kasi 913 million divided by 16 years. As of January 1, 2006, ito yung beginning na year na nagkaroon ng adjustment, 2006 to 2010 or 5 years. As of January 1, 2006, A was merged tax-free with G2AS, G3AS, and underlying subsidiaries with A as the continuing company. No? So, nag-merge na naman sila ng 2006. Imagine, kung every 10 years, mag-merge sila, then mag-recognize ng goodwill. And then yung goodwill, i-amortize mo ng 16 years. No? So, hindi pa tapos na amortize yung goodwill. Nag-merge na naman ulit, another goodwill is recognized. Wala na. Laki ng adjustment, no? Pagdating sa income. Okay. Yun yung nakikita ko actually doon sa mga na-review ko din na financial statements, no? Ang ginawa naman nila, addition at saka disposal ng assets. Na yung disposal ng asset at saka yung addition, same. And then, saan na lumalabas? Sa depreciation. No? Laki na depreciation. Okay. Kaya, sa audit ng financial statement, I'm very particular of the assets at saka depreciation. No? Kasi ang daming issues. Okay. The company uses the T&M method for pricing. Net income, no, ang ginamit ng Pharma ES dito. This method dictates that arm's length earnings reflect the functions performed, the risk assumed, and the assets involved. No? Okay. So, OECD Guidelines, Section 1.42. In transactions between two independent enterprises, compensation usually will reflect the function that each enterprise performed, taking into account assets used and risk assumed. Why? Bakit compensation usually reflect the functions? Because ang sabi dito, ang sabi ng guidelines, ng OECD guidelines, that if your functions is that it is high risk, then you should be compensated for that risk. Why? Because high risk means high rewards. No? So kung mataas yung risk mo, dapat mataas din yung compensation sa iyo. Otherwise, hindi arm's length yung transaction. Why? Because you are not compensated for the risk that you are going to assume. No? And that is not arm's length. Okay. The acquired goodwill must then be regarded as an operating asset. No? So, operating asset niya yung goodwill, which the company auditor has also confirmed. Yan na, kaya yung role ng auditor, malaki, no? Sa mga transfer pricing case, and even in the preparation of financial statements. No? Therefore, the annual amortization of the goodwill value is exactly equal to the annual operating cost of the goodwill. No? So, in the annual reports for A, for the income years 2006 to 2009, it is stated under accounting principles. No? Sa accounting principles naman, intangible fixed assets are measured at cost, less accumulated depreciation and write-downs. No? So, depreciation is made on a straight line basis over the assets' expected useful lives. So, pero sino nag-determine ng amount ng intangibles at saka nung life niya? Siyempre, yung auditor, yung company. And how much is the goodwill that they recognize? 913 million. And how many years is the life of the goodwill? 16 years, no? Kaya meron silang 57 million a year na depreciated value o kaya charged to their operating expenses. Imagine that, 57 million, no? Multiply mo by the tax rate, kung sa Pilipinas yan, multiply mo by 30%. Okay. So the annual report for A for 2010 states, under accounting principles, acquired goodwill is measured at cost, less accumulated depreciation. Goodwill is amortized over its useful life, which is estimated to 16 years or estimated at 16 years. No? So sila din, yung auditor din ang nag-estimate na 16 years. This accounting principle speaks directly against the fact that goodwill should have arisen as claimed by the company solely as a result of changes in accounting principles. But remember dito sa goodwill na to, na recognition ng goodwill, remember that who are transacting here are related parties. No? Kaya very subjective yung recognition and the measurement of goodwill. No? Kasi siya din ang bumili, kanya din yung binili niya. So anong masasabi mo doon? Hindi siya influenced by the market. Influenced lang siya by the decision of the parties. As can be seen from the company accounts, the value of goodwill has been assessed on an ongoing basis. No? So the annual report for 2010 states as follows. The carrying amount of intangible and tangible fixed assets is reviewed annually to determine whether there is any indication of impairment beyond what is expressed by depreciation. No? If this is the case, an impairment test is performed to determine whether the recoverable amount is lower than the carrying amount and is written down to this lower recoverable amount. No? Furthermore, it is stated, the recoverable amount of the asset is calculated at the higher of the net selling price and the capital value. The company's annual reports for 2006 to 2009 state, intangible fixed assets are written down to the recoverable amount. If this value is lower than the carrying amount, the assets are seized annually. No? So ito yung report ng Pharma AS sa kanyang financial statement. In short, ito yung disclosure niya doon sa notes to financial statement. That's why bukas in our two-day seminar, we will study the disclosure or notes to financial statements. No? Okay. No such write-down is seen to have been made, just as the company's auditor is not seen to have made any reservation about what is stated in the accounts regarding the valuation of goodwill, including the impairment test performed. No? Against this background, there is no reversal of amortization of goodwill when the company's arm's length of earnings are assessed. No? Okay. It is then noted that it is correct that Scott, when using databases, recommends that you opt out of companies that are part of a group. Legal Guide, Section CD, this is because there is no guarantee that these companies will set prices and terms for their intra-group transactions at an arm's length level. No? As this is goodwill which is important for operations and which has been acquired through trade between independent parties, it does not matter whether goodwill is included to a greater or lesser extent in the companies that are normally included in a database survey. So making an adjustment with reference to the fact that the comparable should not have similar assets is not correct. No? So yun ang sabi nila. Kasi saan ka makakuha ng comparable mo? Dapat, since ang pinag-usapan is the goodwill, dapat yung comparable mo is may treatment din sila paano nila tinrate yung goodwill. And that company should be an independent company. So if an adjustment is to be made, this must of course ensure that comparability is increased. No? So you have to compare with an independent party. This is not done by disregarding the adjustment for an operating asset at A on the grounds that the comparables do not have a corresponding asset. No? Kaya nga yung comparable should be comparable. Otherwise, hindi sila comparable pagka wala naman siyang asset kasi yung isa may goodwill na 913 million, kung yung comparables mo wala, so they are not comparable. No? Ano sabi ng transfer pricing guidelines? Eliminate those comparables na hindi naman talaga sila comparables. No? Kung pwede, mag-adjust ka. Pero in the event na hindi pwede yung adjustment, then you have to reject the comparable. Okay. So another is the IT cost, no? The information technology cost. As far as the company's IT costs are concerned, it is Scott's opinion that these costs are not extraordinary, which is why there is no need to correct for this in the comparison. A cost of integrating a company's various IT system must be regarded as part of the current operating cost. Section 6 of the State Tax Act, which is why the cost must be included in the comparison. Okay. So to what the company stated that Scott has not shown in detail which transactions have not taken place at the arm's length level and has not taken into account that the company's earnings have been under pressure during the period in question is repeated. No? That Scott has made a correction based on the company's choice of method. Scott has not corrected the company's choice of benchmark. So the company must be considered to agree that this is the right arm's length standard. No? Kasi hindi naman niya kinorek. As compared with companies which has been exposed to similar market conditions, a general reference to the economic crisis in Denmark during the period in question cannot be given significance. No? Biro mo may economic crisis sa Denmark pero hindi kinonsider. To the company's statement that the case also has the special problems that Scott has made a discretionary assessment. So yun ang allegations naman ng pharma company, no? Na yung tax authority daw nagkaroon ng discretionary assessment, no? Regardless of whether the taxpayer has fulfilled the obligations regarding the transfer pricing documentations which are established by law, an executive order which is not even challenged by tax, no? Is noted. No? So paano mo ginagawa yung discretionary assessment, no? Ini-explain din po dito paano nagkaroon ng extra ng assessment, no? Yung nung tawag niya dito, discretionary assessment, no? Kasi ang pinakita niya dito, 'di ba sa ginagawa natin transfer pricing analysis, may arm's length range, no? Nasabi ng OECD, ito tinanong ko talaga to personally sa OECD. Pagka gumawa ka ng range, halimbawa gross profit yung kino-compare mo. You're using the resale price or the cost plus method. So you compare the gross profit. And along that way, yung gross profit ng mga comparables mo, gagawan mo na siya ngayon ng range, no? So, kung halimbawa mag-umpisa siya sa 1 to 10, tapos yun yung gross profit niya, no? Pag pumasok siya within the 25% to yung 1 to 10 yun ang 100%, no? So, between 25% to 75%, pasok pa siya sa range, no? So, ibig sabihin, arm's length pa siya. So, ano yung 25%? 2.5% to 7.5% in a scale of 1 to 10 or in the gross profit na 1 to 10. So, pasok yung 2.5 hanggang 7.5, no? Sa range. So, bakit sinabi dito na discretionary? Kasi, yung Pharma ES, meron siyang gross profit rate, pero nag-assess yung tax authority ng another gross profit rate na within the range din. Kaya ang sabi nila dito, discretionary assessment, no? Okay. So, ito na ang kagandahan kasi sa case na to, ginamit nila yung basis ng kanilang assessment is the transfer pricing documentation. So, very important po yung transfer pricing documentation. Ang na-observe ko, yung ibang companies, hesitant sila na magbigay ng kanilang mga documents. Kasi sabi nila, our documents are confidential. No? Ang sagot ko naman, transfer pricing analysis is also confidential. No? Paano ka makagawa ng magandang transfer pricing analysis na maganda? And you consider all kung itatago nila sa iyo information. So, wala. Hindi mo ma-disclose lahat. So, according to the transfer pricing documentation, the company must receive an arm's length remuneration or operating earnings, EBIT margin of between 3.5% and 3.82%. So, pwede siya, 3.52 to 3.82%. So, the company has not actually achieved this EBIT or earnings before income tax margin as goodwill amortization has been reversed, no? After Scott has recognized cost for goodwill, on the contrary, the company has had operating losses in all years of employment dahil doon sa operating expense na amortization of goodwill na 57 million, wala ng profit ang company for how many years? Na-drain siya ng profit. Bakit? Kinain na lahat ng depreciation ng goodwill. No? You can just imagine, you create one account and then spread mo yan for 16 years. For 16 years, benefited ang company mo for tax purposes. No? Kaya sabi ko sa transfer pricing, talagang pinag-iisipan, matatalino ang gumagawa. Okay. Scott refers to the result from the annual accounts which are reproduced in the case presentation on page 3. So, anong pinakita nila dito? Yung documentation dun sa presentation ng account. Scott's correction of the internal settlement prices removes the current losses and instead brings the company earnings in line with the EBIT margin which the company itself has used as an arm's length reference, the company's database survey. Scott thus challenges the company's way of applying the T&M method where the current amortization of goodwill is kept out of the income statement. And Scott maintains that an arm's length correction of the taxable income must be made. Section 2.1 of the Tax Assessment Act 1 and the State Tax Act 6. Scott's employment is based on the company's own statement of an appropriate arm's length earnings level, the database survey. The company's remarks that Scott focuses unilaterally on a distinction between whether an accounting item is ordinary or extraordinary are stated as follows. Scott uses the term extraordinary in relation to whether the company's amortization of goodwill in relation to the companies included in the comparability analysis can be considered such an extraordinary expense, So yun yung goodwill. That it must be excluded from the company's net profit in order to increase comparability. So tanggalin mo yung amortization ng goodwill or depreciation ng goodwill kasi kinonsider nila na extraordinary expense. So hindi siya kasama sa operating expenses. Scott has both in the order of 26 September 2012 and our letter of 8 May 2013 stated that Scott, in contrast to the company, does not consider amortization of goodwill to be such an extraordinary item. So hindi niya kinonsider na extraordinary. In relation to the above meaning of the term extraordinary, that omission of this in the comparability analysis, comparability increases. Okay. Scott does not find that amortization of goodwill is an exceptionally extraordinary expense that requires a comparability adjustment that the company has made in its comparability analysis. This position applies independently of the accounting rules for the placement of the expense in the income statement. Ang dami na namang lamok, hari. The decisive factor for recognizing amortization of goodwill is not the accounting classification. So, yan ang sabi nila. The decisive factor for recognizing amortization of goodwill is not the accounting classification. So, hindi misclassified na account yung goodwill. Scott agrees with the company that an accrued goodwill is not booked in the account as an asset in a non-traded company. But this does not change the fact that the asset exists and the company makes use of the asset in relation to the controlled transactions priced according to the T&M method, where all operating assets must be included in the valuation. Scott has finally noted that Scott at no time, neither in the ruling nor in subsequent letter, has justified the increase in the ruling with reference to the company having accounting deficit if the company statement in its letter of 30 August 2013, which is page 4 ng docket ng case, In consultation responses to the Danish Tax Appeals Board recommendation, Scott has explained why it is believed that the goodwill item that is the focal point in the present case constitutes an operating promotion asset. No? Scott notes in this connection, if a company buys the shares of another company for a price that is significantly above the book value of the equity in the both company. So ito yung contention ng pharma company ha. Binili daw nila yung company na napakataas kaysa doon sa value niya. But remember na sila din yung may-ari nung company na binili nila na pagkataas-taas yung presyo at inlagyan nila ng goodwill at inamortize nila ang goodwill ng 16 years. No? So, kung sa ordinary person lang i-analyze mo, that is self-serving. No? Then the difference between the book value and the market value will sometimes be booked in the accounts of the buying company as group goodwill, no? Or stock goodwill. In the acquiring company, group goodwill is simply an expression of the fact that the company has bought shares in another company where there are own accumulated intangible assets which are not booked in the company, no? So hindi na book yun sa company na binili nila, no? Scott therefore agrees that the purchase of the shares in another company will not transfer intangible assets from the acquired company to the acquiring company. So walang intangible assets, no, na napunta sa acquiring company. The intangible assets paid for at the time of the purchase of the shares in GSAS and which are therefore in the acquired company before the purchase are also in G5AS after the purchase. For the capital owning company, G2AS, which only owns the shares in G5A, the intangible assets therefore have no operational significance. No? So, walang significant. However, Scott does not agree that the goodwill in question after the merger of the three companies, G5AS, G2AS, and A, is an accounting item that has no effect on operations and thus revenue in A. No, kasi wala daw effect ba? Bakit walang effect? Nagkaroon nga ng depreciation na 57 million a year. In Scott's opinion, the so-called additional price that G2AS pays upon the purchase of the shares in G5AS corresponding to the market value of the intangible assets that were actually and still are present in G5AS, later G3AS, and now A, when the companies are subsequently merged, as in the present case, the intangible assets that until the merger in the acquired company, G5AS, will be included like all the other assets and liabilities in the company in the continuing company. Here, A, Scott has concluded. No, so ito na yung conclusion ng tax authority. In the present case, the merger involves bringing together the ownership of the intangible assets and the book value of the intangible assets. In the merger, the ownership of the intangible assets is transferred from J5AS, J2AS to A, where the value, kasi ang continuing company dito nung merge sila is A, no? Kaya dito sa mga transfer pricing study ko, I'm very particular of the merger and consolidation or the restructuring, no? That it should be disclosed during the transfer pricing analysis. So where the value of the intangible assets now also after the merger has been booked. The accounting for a share purchase followed by a merger thus corresponds to the fact that the continuing company, instead of buying the shares, had bought the assets and liabilities of the discontinuing companies. Had A bought all assets and liabilities out of J5AS, J2AS, then the assets, including the intangible assets that had been accumulated by G5AS and were therefore not booked, would after the purchase be booked in the accounts of A at market value. Kasi hindi nga na-book noon sa binili nila ng company. So, sila, nung nabili na nila, sila yung nag-book, no? The same thing happens in this case when the companies are merged after the share purchase, no? So, Scott has subsequently noted that the identified significant goodwill value in A means that the company is not comparable with the companies on which the application of the T&M method is based on the company's own benchmark. This is because the method roughly, according to Scott, is to determine normal income. No? Normal income. So, hindi kasali yung depreciation ng goodwill. For the tested company, based on the income that independent comparable companies which are assumed not to have unique and very valuable intangible assets obtained. If a significant non-book value of intangible assets is found in the tested company, this is an indication that the market's expectations for the income in the company in question are not normal, no? But are far beyond what the company's functions, book assets, and risk warrant. Scott has therefore pointed out that it should be considered whether the Armsland test can instead be directed in the other party in the controlled transaction, or where, for example, the profit split method could be used. Okay. This is based on the fact that Scott does not believe that the comparable companies in the company's own benchmark are in fact comparable in terms of that asset side. No? Kaya nga, nag-present na ang Pharma ES ng transfer pricing documentation, transfer pricing analysis. But the tax authority does not believe on the comparable. Ibig sabihin, yung mga companies presented on that study, hindi sila inaccept ng tax authority. That's why, kaya sinasabi ko sa inyo, when we try to do our transfer pricing analysis, we have to consider the transfer pricing audit guidelines. So I'm very glad that we already have the transfer pricing guidelines. Why? Because during the preparation of the transfer pricing analysis, then you can always consider the transfer pricing guidelines para hindi ka nalalayo doon, no? And so that the examiner can no longer disallow or make adjustment to your comparables, no? Kasi may mga rejection criteria na sila doon. So, during the, kaya nga kami, no, halika hahari. No, anyway, sample lang naman. Akin na nga yung transfer pricing analysis report na ginawa natin. Ipakita ko sa kanila. Kasi yan yung sinasabi dito, no, the fact that the comparables in terms of the asset side. Ang ginawa po natin dito sa ating transfer pricing analysis is that wala ngang perma ko ito. Oh. Akin na. Permahan ko na. No? Kasi ipapakita ko sa kanila yung mga ginawa natin na in compliance with the transfer pricing audit guidelines. No? Okay. Para hindi po kayo malito. Nagkaroon na tayo ng rejection, no? And we follow the rejection criteria of the transfer pricing guidelines. Can just imagine, no? Makagawa ka, parang gumawa ka na lang ng libro, no? Ito yung transfer pricing analysis po natin. Ito po. Table number 40, no, sa analysis natin. Table 40, checklist of comparables, compliance with RAMO 1-2019. Ayan, no, RAMO 1-19. So you have here the name of the comparables, and then may checklist ka na. That's why, dito sa findings nung SCAT, no, dito sa tax authority, kaya ko na consider ito lahat because I read cases, no? So, anong sabi niya dito? Companies on benchmark are in fact comparable in terms of the asset side. No, so, hindi sila naniniwala dito sa comparables na ginawa ng client, no? So, anong ginawa natin? Considering that we anticipate that, meron na tayong ginawa dito na mga checklist ng compliance with RAMO 1-2019. So that kung questionin man tayo ng tax authority, we already have our record, no? And this is based on the information gathered from the company's financial statements. Hari. Sa atin naman tong isa eh. Dalawa lang ibigay natin sa client. Kasi hindi naman pwede na wala tayong kopya. No? Okay. So, when you are doing a transfer pricing analysis, be sure na yung ready kayo that your transfer pricing analysis report will reaches the court. No? Okay. Ilang oras na tayo?
1:37.
May viewers pa tayo?
9 viewers tayo, ma'am. Tapos nag-comment si Ma'am Lilian Yao.
Ano sabi?
Sabi niya, ma'am, good evening po, ma'am. Pasensya na po kung di ako nakasubaybay ng live stream.
Oo nga.
Medyo
no?
busy kasi sa pag-close ng mga books. Paggawa ng ITR.
Filing, yes, correct ka dyan. Kaya good luck to you, no? Palakihan na tayo ngayon ng iBag. Kasi ako, aside from may transfer pricing analysis, may mga financial statements, may audit, may lecture pa, no? Kaya minsan nahihilo na kami nangyari. Pero enjoy. Alam nyo yung pagod, baliwala yan basta na-enjoy mo yung trabaho mo, no? Correct. Correct. Kaya good luck sa mga CPAs. Okay. So, the company's perception, no? Kasi, ito may tuloy pa pala. If the TNM method is to be used anyway, Scott has pointed out that an adjustment or division must be made to take into account the presence of the intangible assets of the tested party, G5AS, and after the merger, A, therefore, the depreciation on this goodwill is deducted from its company's operating earnings before the comparison is made. So, dapat daw, tinanggal na yung goodwill bago pa sa ang comparison. So, ibig sabihin, hindi siya kasama. The company's perception, the company's representative has filed a claim that the company's taxable income in 2006 to 2010 be reduced to the tax return. No? So, yun yung sabi ng Pharma ES. It is therefore referred to that there is no basis for increasing the income as done. So, wala daw basis yung adjustment na in-increase yung income. As A has documented that the company has had an earning on the operation which is clearly within the relevant and comparable arm's length range. Why? Because of the transfer pricing documentation that they presented to the court and to the tax authority that the pricing of the company is arm's length. No? Furthermore, it is pointed out that Scott has no demonstrated or simply made it probable that A's earnings have been affected by the joint venture with intra-group parties. No? Scott's decision is an arbitrary increase in the company's taxable income without any kind of connection to the underlying intra-group transactions, which is a prerequisite for being able to apply Section 2 of the Tax Assessment Act. So, in addition, reference is made to the fact that Scott, without legal authority, has employed the income according to an estimate. Scott has estimated, sabi yan ang contention ng taxpayer, no? That the tax authority daw walang legal authority at in-estimate lang daw niya yung income, no? At its discretion, kaya ang tawag niya discretionary assessment. Sa atin, sa Pilipinas, arbitrary assessment, no? Yun yung katumbas na sa kanila na discretionary assessment, no? Scott has estimated the income at its discretion without proving relevant errors or deficiencies in the documentation provided. So it is fundamental breach of general legal principles when Scott determines the income according to an estimate without examining the case. Regardless of whether the decision is invalid, Scott has disregarded its burden of proof. No? So, dinisregard daw ni Scott. Scott's discretionary decision of 26 September 2012, therefore, lacks both a basis and a legal basis. No? So, wala daw legal basis yung discretionary assessment ng tax authority. In determining intra-group prices, the company has used the transaction determined net profit method in order to definitively determine whether trading has taken place or an arm's length. A comparison has been made with results for another comparable companies in order to achieve a sufficient degree of comparability. The analysis must take into account significant differences, including the possible presence and market value of intangible assets. As the company in the benchmark study has basically excluded companies that are part of a group, the companies included in the benchmark cannot be expected to have accumulated acquired goodwill related to investments capitalized in the annual report. The accounting results for the comparable transactions are thus not reduced by the accounting depreciation related to the company's goodwill. So in contrast, a significant amortization of goodwill has been recognized in the annual report for A. This difference can be taken into account by calculating adjustments that neutralize its financial effect in a reliable manner. Adjustment for significant differences is in accordance with the main rule in the OECD guidelines. So, application of the Armsland principle is generally based on a comparison of the conditions in a controlled transaction with the conditions in the transactions between independent enterprises. In order for such comparison to be useful, ito na yung sabi ng guidelines, ha? This is already OECD guidelines speaking. In order for such comparison to be useful, the economically relevant characteristics of the situation being compared must be sufficiently comparable. To be comparable means that none of the differences, if any, between the situations being compared could materially affect the condition being examined in the methodology, whether price or margin, or that reasonably accurate adjustment can be made to eliminate the effect of any such differences. So, ito yung dalawang condition sa comparability. In determining the degree of comparability, including what adjustments are necessary to establish it, an understanding of how independent enterprises evaluate potential transactions is required. Detailed guidance on performing a comparability analysis is set forth in Chapter 3. So, Chapter 3 ang transfer pricing analysis of the OECD transfer pricing guidelines. The most far-reaching would be to calculate goodwill and amortization thereof for all the companies included in the basis of comparison. However, such an approach would be subject to a great deal of uncertainty. Pero tingnan nyo ngayon, speaking of uncertainty, yung cry of China noon na tax certainty, ina-address na din ng OECD. So, unti-unti doon sa mga reports nila, on Pillar 1, Pillar 2, ina-answer na nila yung concern about tax certainty. The most reliable adjustment is therefore made by adjusting the results for A. This can be done completely without uncertainty, as amortization of goodwill appears directly from the annual report for A. Yung amortization ng goodwill, saan daw galing yun? Sa annual report din ng A. That's why, alam nyo, dun sa financial statements natin, that is our annual reports, ang daming information dyan that will be used by the tax authority. Kaya nga, those information will be taken against us. Alam nyo, yung mga early 2012, 2013, wherein there is no yet transfer pricing guidelines, kasi yung 2013 meron na. But prior to that, alam nyo, ang lakas ng loob ng mga companies, magre-report sila doon sa related party transactions nila na parang iniinis nila yung BAR. Bakit? Naglalagay sila doon na the related party transactions, the transaction is not arm's length. Sabi, ang lakas naman ng loob nito. When in fact, alam naman nila na when the transaction is not arm's length, it will be adjusted. But since hindi naman nagta-transfer o pricing audit yung BAR at that time, Wala lang. Kaya siguro sinasadya nila na ilagay talaga sa disclosure na the transaction is not arm's length, no? Kaya nga sabi dito, the disclosure mo in your financial statements, kaya nakalagay dito, the amortization of goodwill appears directly from the annual report for A. Yun naman yung sinabi ng tax authority. Doon mismo galing sa report niya, no? Once this adjustment has been made, the net gain across the chosen basis of comparison will be comparable and reflect the market value of the function. No? So the adjustment for differences in amortization of goodwill means that the tax return results for A are within the presented arm's length range. No? Anong result ng case na to? Partly yung assessment na dinisallow, yung sa iba ni-remand sa lower court for study. Pero hindi, ito basahin natin ha, para hindi naman to preempt you, but at least may idea kayo, no? The High Court finds that Scott has been entitled to make a correction of his income in the income years 2006 to 2009, whereas Scott, according to the information of the transfer pricing documentation, kaya yung transfer pricing documentation nyo, yun yung gagamitin din against you, no? And what is otherwise stated has not been entitled to make a correction of his income in the income year 2010. So yung 2010, hindi siya pinagawa ng correction, pero yung 2006 to 2009 meron, no? So, the increase in A's and B's taxable income, in-increasean nila. Oh? Okay. So, yun po yung verdict. So, partly nanalo din dito yung, pero mas panalo yung tax authority. No? Against this background, it is concluded that the documentation submitted makes it possible to assess that the company's control transactions have been in accordance with the arm's length principle. In connection with the statutory documentation, it has been assessed on this basis that it is not necessary to carry out further investigation. Kasi ganyan po ako magbasa ng case eh. Basahin ko muna yung facts and then basahin ko yung decision, no? And then saka ko basahin what happens during the case, no? Kasi yung iba, basahin na lang yung case, basahin yung decision. Yung along the way na process, which is yun ang importante, which is yun yung magagamit mo if you are a consultant and if you are a practicing lawyer. Yung process doon, yun yung makakatulong sa iyo. Pero pag hindi mo na yun binasa, dahil alam mo na ito na yung verdict, inalam mo lang yung result, hindi mo inalam yung process. Process is more important than the result. No? Kasi, paano sila naka-arrive na ganun yung decision? Anong nangyari? So it's very important. That's why, kahit nasabihin pa nung ibang mga viewers natin, kasi makikita ko sa comment portion, i-summarize mo na dapat ganito yung ginawa mo, i-summarize. Sabi ko, pag sinamarize mo yan, makikita mo ba yung process? Makikita mo lang yung result, but hindi mo makikita yung process. That's why, sa akin naman, yung manunood sa akin at makinig, mahaba, pero maintindihan mo yung details. Pero kung gusto mo lang yung mga nagle-lecture ng 6 minutes, i-lecture na nila yung corporate income tax, 5 minutes, i-lecture na nila yung friends benefits. Sabi ko, kawawa naman yung makinig doon. Why? Anong maintindihan nila? Kaya parang sa case din, mabasa mo lang yung decision, yung case, pero yung paglilitis, yung proseso, hindi mo alam. No? I'm very particular of the process, just like Japanese, no? Kasi sabi nila, if the process is right, the result is right. Na-arrive mo yung ganyang conclusion, anong ginawa mo during the proceedings? Yun ang importante, no? Okay. So, against this background, it is concluded that the documentation submitted makes it possible to assess that the company's control transactions have been in accordance with the arm's length principle. In connection with the statutory documentation, it has been assessed on the basis that it is not necessary to carry out further investigation. In a comparison with the arm's length interval, Scott has not recognized that it is necessary to take into account that the operating result in the annual report for A contains a significant cost regarding systematic amortization of goodwill. Furthermore, for the income year 2006, Scott has reversed cost in relation to the integration of a new IT system. O, noong 2006, may ginawa pa siyang iba yung integration ng IT nila. No? Scott does not consider it an extraordinary expense to incur cost for the integration of the new TT system. The cost forms part of the current operating cost to be attributed to the controlled transactions. Dapat hindi no? Kasi minsan nang yan nangyari, hindi yan yearly. So, ano yan? Extraordinary expense, hindi ordinary, no? So, amortization of goodwill. IS goodwill arose through a merger in 2006 of J2AS, J3AS, and underlying subsidiaries and A, with A as the continuing company. So, yun yung nangyari, kaya nagkaroon ng amortization ng goodwill. Kaya very important that you have to study this because maintindihan mo bakit sila nagkaroon ng goodwill. No? Paano nagkaroon ng 913 million na goodwill? Ito yung ini-explain ng tax authority. No? Okay. In 1998, G2AS had acquired the shares in G5AS, later G3AS, and paid an additional price for the shares in relation to the company's book equity. Due to change in accounting policies in 2003, the difference between the price of the shares and the book equity is capitalized as group goodwill in G6 accounts, which gave rise to an annual depreciation of approximately 57 million Danish krone, on which by the subsequent merger has been transferred to A. No? So saan pala galing yung goodwill na yon? Galing sa book. Galing yon doon sa mga companies na nag-merge at ang continuing company ACA. No? So according to the company, it is thus a bit random which added values are or can be capitalized in the annual report as well as how these added values affect the result. It largely depends on whether previous acquisition have been completed as well as the chosen accounting policy. No? Kasi nag-change sila ng accounting policy and ni-recognize na nila yung goodwill. Reference is made to a study from 2002 published in RR 2002-10.26 by Assistant Professor PhD Kandmerk. PC on the accounting treatment of goodwill, including consequences of capitalization requirements, yung goodwill na i-capitalize mo. The articles concludes that the financial ratios are significantly affected by changes in the accounting principle. Oo naman, for goodwill. Siyempre naman, yung mga ratios yan, pagka nagkaroon ka ng accounting changes, damay-damay lahat ng ratios mo. Activation and term depreciation of goodwill, which is now required, has the effect that the company's profitability will show a decrease. Siyempre, 57 million, no, ang inamortize mo yearly. While the financial risk will decrease, will be negatively affected by current depreciation. Even if the underlying earnings are the same, the accounting treatment of group goodwill depends on the following factors. The investment are measured at cost or using the equity method, no? At cost or using the equity method. Anong cost ng goodwill? Whether the accounts are presented in accordance with the Danish Financial Statements Act or the IFRS or the International Financial Reporting Standards. If investments are measured at cost, no share goodwill arises in the acquiring company as the entire cost is capitalized as the acquisition cost of the investment. No depreciation is made on this. On the other hand, impairment tests of the value are performed on an ongoing basis so that the carrying amount of the equity interest is written down if impairment is found. If investments are measured according to the equity method as a result of the purchase price exceeding the acquired company equity, a group goodwill corresponding to this difference will be recognized. Pursuant to the Danish Financial Statements Act, recognized share goodwill must be amortized over the expected economic life of the asset with a fixed annual depreciation. The economic life of the asset is based on a subjective assessment of the economic life of the underlying asset in the acquired asset. As a result of the estimates on which the subjective assessment is based, there may be significant differences in the length of fixed-term depreciation for the same type of business. Pursuant to Section 43, Subsection 3, intangible assets are not amortized over a period exceeding 20 years, notwithstanding that such assets may have a longer economic life. So, mas pwedeng mahigit pa sa 20 years daw yung life ng intangible assets. Yun ngang ibang case, di ba, ang intangibles, binalyo nila in perpetuity, no? Walang katapusan. According to IFRS, amortization of goodwill is not permitted, no? Hindi naman talaga kahit sa Philippines, no? Yung goodwill is not recognized for tax purposes. If it is therefore not possible to make meaningful comparisons with companies that have been selected as a basis for comparison unless this is corrected for. Kaya i-correct mo kasi hindi nga allowed. Goodwill, which is recognized in the annual report for A and which is amortized in the accounts, arises solely as a result of a change in accounting policies. Imagine, hindi factual kasi ang tax, hindi mo pwedeng tax mo lang because of change in policies or in accounting and a subsequent merger. This is goodwill that arises from the valuation of investment or shares using the equity method. Depreciation is not an expression of a financial loss or consumption of an asset that can reasonably be expected to be found similarly in the annual report of the independent companies selected for comparison. Depreciation is based solely on the accounting policies that the company has chosen to follow. Ito yung contention ng tax authority, no? We will stop here, no? Next time, dito naman tayo sa IT cost, no? So we still have part 3. Siguro hanggang part 4 pa tayo or part 5 ng ating discussion on policy and documentation, no, ng transfer pricing and also itong Pharma ES case. No? Kasi maganda ito because this makes use of the transfer pricing documentation which is very relevant and very important now because of the current requirement or the present requirement of the BAR on the BAR Form 1709 which is the transfer pricing documentation. No? So I would like to say good night everyone. No? Kasi meron pa tayong seminar bukas, those who will want to attend, no? Meron tayong seminar, 2-day seminar on tax preparer. So thank you very much and good evening.